along with some co-authors from Northwestern, recently did this archival study of urban development and preservation in Philadelphia, specifically around the Independence National Historical Park, which includes Independence Hall, and a lot of kind of historical buildings from the colonial period. And in a lot of respects, it's sort of the antithesis of Houston, where the sort of historical architecture and the preservation of a big section of the city that looks a lot like it looked in 1776 is really celebrated not only by the local preservationists, but the local sort of growth machine, the people who tend to have a say in what the city's going to look like moving forward. And I think we tend to think of Houston as being sort of the opposite, where there's constantly new development, there's not a lot of old stuff, and I think it's not really a question that's been wrestled with at a broad scale in the city. But I think we're starting to see that change a little bit with a few recent events. So the preservation of the Astrodome being a big one, along with the creation of a historic district up in Houston Heights and some other sort of smaller scale neighborhood level efforts at preservation. But it certainly is more challenging in Houston, I think, for preservation advocates because there's not a lot of the legal protections and political mechanisms that can prevent the demolition of architecturally notable buildings. And I think what we found that sort of surprised us in Philadelphia was that, architectural significance by itself is not really a necessary or a sufficient condition to get a building preserved when there's a broader development scheme going on around it. It's really the question that sort of rises to the top for us in our analysis is what's the sort of historical time period being celebrated, and what are the social groups that have a stake in that history? And I think that's a big question as Houston starts to look at some of these post-World War II structures like the Astrodome, like the Sears building in Midtown, is saying, if we're going to save these buildings, why are we saving them, and what's the history that we're remembering by saving this building?